So, good afternoon, and it's a warm welcome to the webinar Introduction to Systemic Leadership, and a warm welcome from the Performance Coach team. So, this webinar is part of our 2013 Virtual Leadership Summit. I hope you've had a very useful experience this week in terms of your leadership development around some useful topics. Please remember to visit our website, www.theperformancecoach.com, to see the other resources that are available for your further reading and also watching in terms of additional webinars. So, I'm Damien Wamfor. I'm one of the directors at the Performance Coach, and I'm going to be your facilitator for this session. In terms of my background, I'm an executive coach working with individuals and teams. I'm also a facilitator working on our executive coach training programs and also our leadership development programs as well. And systemic leadership or systems thinking is an area that I'm very passionate about. It's an area that I focus on in terms of the work I do with individuals and organizations. So this session is going to be round about, well, up to 45 minutes. And you can see the aims of our session in front of you on the screen. So I really want to help you develop a greater understanding of the concept of systemic leadership. Um, and I really, our work in this area has been informed by Barry Oshry, who's the thought leader around systems intelligence or system insight. And the reason this is such a critical topic, I believe, for leaders is, and I'm sure you can relate to this, that there are a lot of emotionally charged issues that arise between people that you may be leading, people within your organizations. And these issues feel very personal when in fact they're not. A lot of these issues are systemic and as a result of organizational dynamics and also the context in which we're working and the people who are engaged. So during this session, we're really going to look at how you can create more awareness in terms of the systemic forces that may be at play when we are leaders, hence why we're going to develop more understanding around the concept of systemic leadership. We're also going to look at how you can learn ways to bring more systemic awareness to your role, to your work, and your team. And specifically in this piece, we're really going to look around the term system blindness and the different ways that we can be blind to the organizational forces and dynamics that are really affecting us personally, affecting our teams, and the organizations that we're responsible for. So we're going to conclude the session by looking at new ways of relating as a leader. So in terms of what I really hope you walk away with is, what you can do with your team to create more awareness in terms of systemic perspective, but also how you need to be as a leader, because it's very difficult for your teams to take a systemic view unless you're looking from that place yourself. So in terms of this session, there are going to be a number of reflexive exercises that I'm going to ask you to undertake. So it'd be great to have a pen and paper handy. Um, it'd also be great if you can close off any applications that you may have open right now, because that sometimes affects the sound quality and also the speed of the webinar as well. So those of you that are familiar with working with the performance coach, as executive coaches, we're going to ask you to contract with us at the start of the session. So first one is, how present are you for this session? How able are you to completely focus in on the content and complete the reflexive exercises? So what do you need to do to minimize any distractions that you may be experiencing? And how do you need to be to get the most out of this session? And then finally, starting with the outcome in mind, what is your learning objective for the session? What do you want to take away from this session in terms of what would really make it a valuable investment in your time? So I want to start this session with a quote from Peter Senge. So on the screen in front of you, you can see his quote in terms of how our traditional view of leaders as special people who set the direction, make the key decisions, and energize the troops is deeply rooted in an individualistic and non-systemic worldview. So long as such myths prevail, they reinforce a focus on short-term events and charismatic heroes rather than on systemic forces and collective learning. And I start this session with this quote because traditionally we've had a heroic leadership model where the leader was the center and the focus. And these leaders often believed that they could surmount any challenge that the organization threw at them. And today, because of the complexity, because of the global marketplace, um, this style of leadership, um, I suppose, in some ways, is becoming extinct. And what we're seeing is leaders are beginning to see themselves more as serving an organization or serving the system. So, in a way, we've seen a reframe in the concept of leadership. Systemic leadership really fits into this aspect of complexity, this aspect of the ambiguity that exists because of the virtual, the matrix organizations that we're responsible for. And as a result of that, as leaders, we really need to be alert to the energies across the whole system rather than just focusing on potentially the individual areas that we're responsible for. So, by taking a systemic perspective, we're able to see, I suppose, the psychological and energetic ties across the organization. And these are revealed. So it means that we're not maintaining any blind spots that we may have held traditionally. So I suppose in a way, I'm trying to make the case for taking more of a systemic perspective as a leader here. So to make this this piece a bit more concrete, I wanted to move on and look at the value of systemic leadership. So on the screen in front of you, you can see some key thoughts around this point. And I just want to go back to the point I made at the start of this session. Often in our leadership roles, we may come across situations where, or blocks in the team, or perhaps relationships seem stuck where it becomes very, very personal. Um, and that's the focus point for an intervention when what we're trying to do here is open up and depersonalize events and situations and really become more conscious around some of the complexity and the forces that we may be experiencing. So let's just make this a bit more practical. And what I want you to do is just think of a current challenge that you may be facing in your role. So it may be a project you're responsible for, it may be a team that you're leading currently, and perhaps a challenge that the team are facing, maybe a difficult relationship that you're dealing with at the moment, maybe a difficult client relationship. So again, just think of a current challenge, and then you can use this for some of the reflective exercises that we're going to be going through during this session. So we're talking about systemic leadership, so it's worth just talking about what we mean by a system. And here are a couple of definitions that I'll just encourage you to reflect on. So if we're really talking about a system as, I suppose, the space between its parts or the sum of its parts. So what we can start seeing there is we're not focusing just on the individual parts or people. It's about viewing the system as a whole. And when we view the system as a whole, we start to get some awareness about the patterns of relationships that we may be seeing. So again, just thinking of that challenge that you're currently experiencing, just start thinking about the lens you're holding. Are you focused on a part or a person, or are you starting to think about the patterns of relationships or the system in its entirety? And so when we're starting to think in this way, we're starting to shift our perspective to more of a systemic view. So as I said earlier, moving from a focus on parts to a focus on the whole system. Moving away from specific objects to thinking about relationships. Thinking about the specific contents, moving to thinking about the patterns, and so on. And if we can shift our mindset to the right and start looking for some of these, I suppose, dynamics that are playing out within the organization, it stops us from our vulnerability to falling into our blind spots and to our potential traps we may not be seeing in terms of relationships within groups and the organization. So, a characteristic of a system, so we're starting to define that now. Again, I think this is a useful reflection in terms of the challenge that you were thinking of earlier. So, here we see characteristics of a system. System is two or more elements in a relationship. If we change in one part, we actually affect the whole. And if we change the whole, there's a change in the part as well. So all systems interconnect, and systems are in a constant state of flux and change, which is often the experience that people talk about either in the coaching sessions I'm delivering or on the workshops that we're running. So again, just reflect on the challenge that you're currently facing, and maybe just start thinking about this challenge in terms of the system that you may be seeing. So Barry Oshry, as I said earlier, one of the thought leaders around systems intelligence or system insight, he spoke around different ways that we can be blind to a system. And on the screen in front of you, you can see the first part of this, spatial blindness. So again, maybe just reflect on the challenge that you're facing and think about, does any of this resonate with you? So again, just thinking of the definition, this part links to that in terms of what is a system. So we're just seeing our part of the system, but not the whole. We're not seeing what the other worlds are like. So the other stakeholders, the other people involved in the system, and how our world impacts them. And we often speak about, in terms of leadership, a key component being our sense of empathy, our ability to understand what it's like and our potential impact on others. But here we're sort of seeing, without this idea of we can be blind to this spatial aspect of those relationships and how our relationships are interconnected. So again, just reflect about your challenge and what this may be telling you. The second aspect of blindness that we may experience is this idea of temporal blindness. It's this idea of time, we're seeing in the present and what we're experiencing now, but not the past and what's led to these experiences. So we're not taking into account perhaps what's gone on before, who's been involved in the situation, who's influenced this up to this stage. Sometimes I'm working with a leader that's recently taken on a leadership role, and they're experiencing from this temporal blindness because they're not taking into account the influence of the leader that was sat in the chair before them and how they've influenced the team and the team's thinking and the challenges that they're currently facing in terms of the relationships. Um, Maybe because they're not honoring what's gone on before them. So if your challenge is to do with your team or a relationship, you may just want to reflect on, I suppose, the time aspect of this situation. If it's in terms of your team, reflect on, how long has each of the members of your team been on the team? What's their length of service in a team, and what's that telling you about some of the situations that are playing out? Perhaps think about who was there before, and again, what this may be telling you. You may be thinking about who else has influenced this team or this situation in the past as well. And Oshri spoke about a third way we could be blind to the system in terms of relational blindness. And he took about three different sorts of relationships that we may experience. And this was really from his studies over the past 35 years of systems in organizations. And he spoke around how we may experience top to bottom relationships. So, if we're at the top of a relationship, it's when we've got designated responsibility for the system or some part of the system or process. So when you're thinking about day to day, I'm sure there'll be relationships where you'll be at the top and relationships where you'll be at the bottom. So again, those different positions may affect the dynamics that we're experiencing and the different expectations. We may have end, middle, end relationships. Sometimes we're going to find ourselves in the middle. Perhaps we're torn between the conflicting needs, demands, and priorities of the two ends. We may find ourselves in a middle relationship when the conflicting pressures are above us from more senior leaders or below us from our teams. And again, it's being aware of these different types of relationships and how we can experience those dynamics. Or we may find ourselves as a provider or customer. So again, provider to customer relationship. So as a provider, we'll be providing services and products, and as customers, we'll be seeking products and services. So again, just thinking about those different expectations that we have in these different types of relationships. So again, I'll just ask you to reflect on that challenge that you thought of, and how would you describe that relationship in terms of these different ways we can relate? Is it a top bottom, and where are you? Is it an end middle end, and where are you? Is it provider customer, and where are you? And what's that telling you about the dynamics that may be playing out? And again, it may be multiple versions of these in the same relationship. And it's just thinking about those different expectations. And the reason this is important is a key output of the dynamics that we may experience is around responsibility and balance as a result of these relationships. And often, this responsibility and balance is often unconscious, it's not by choice. So, for example, if we take the top one, the top to bottom relationship, so the top may feel responsible for the event or process, and the bottom holds the top responsible. So, long term, this responsibility imbalance becomes disabling. So, by bringing more awareness to this dynamic, we can begin to build better ways of working between us. We can really consciously manage expectations and clarity in terms of communication with regards to these more systemic relationships. So, just thinking about that challenge, what is the potential for you to become more consciously aware around some of these system dynamics that may be playing out? And the final one that Oshri is talking about here in this webinar is process blindness. So we don't see processes as whole, but just our part in them. We don't see systems as a whole, but just our part of the system. And leaders that I'm often working with will talk about their frustration and their stress that they're experiencing as a result of changes that are being made in part of the system. And what we see is breakdowns in relationships occur when the system processes go out of balance. So perhaps parts of the systems are engaging in re-engineering processes with excluding other parts of the system or not keeping other parts of the system updated. So if you take one of the relationships from the previous slide, so perhaps the top, middle, bottom positions in a relationship, as an example, um, if there's a challenge in a process that you're currently dealing with, if anybody in these different relational positions, so either at the top, the middle, or the bottom, looks at this process in isolation in terms of the other parts of the system, this can feel very personal. If somebody is viewing and making changes without involving other people in parts of the system, it can become very personal. It becomes about position. However, we view this from more of a systemic perspective and look at the whole system and encourage our team to take a whole system. So different understanding and I suppose impact is found in terms of the changes that we make. So what happens when we experience systems blindness? So in terms of these different dynamics, you can sort of see some areas to it. We make up stories. It becomes about them. We take it personally. It's been done to challenge us. We react to it. And the impact is it's the end of the relationship. So they're the different ways that we can be blind to the system. And again, the encouragement is it's about as leaders becoming more consciously aware and helping the people that we lead to focus on these different system dynamics that may be playing out. And, encouraging them to take out the personal positions within the relationships, within the context they're working, and then help them develop specific strategies to take on more of a system view. So let's look at what we could be doing in terms of a conversation with the team around the challenge. So again, just bring to mind the challenge that you thought of earlier. And we're just going to look at using more of an integrated systems view to create some greater awareness, both in terms of we could use this in terms of the team, or also as personal reflection. So what we're actually doing is in a way taking a helicopter view. So let's start with going outside of ourselves and starting at the bottom in the center, in the blue circle in the team. So start thinking about this challenge. What is happening for the other people involved in this situation? When you think of the team, what are their wants and needs? And again, I just encourage you to reflect as I'm asking you these questions. What is important for them? If the team had a voice, what would the team say about this situation? What would the team say is important? So let's go slightly higher and look at organizational dynamics. What are the organizational behaviors that you're seeing in terms of this situation? Thinking about the culture, what are the unwritten ground rules for how things are really done around here? What's that telling you? Let's go slightly higher now and think of the stakeholders. So, what would you say are the views of the key internal stakeholders? What are they interested in? And what's important to them? How about any external stakeholders? What are they interested in? And what's important to them? Let's go slightly higher now and view it from a sector perspective. So, when you think about your sector, what else is happening in your sector that may be influencing this? What are some of the challenges that are being seen across the sector? And when you think about the sector, what are some of the key influences that may be impacting you right now? Let's take this a bit higher now and think about it from a broader business perspective. So, what's happening in your broader context? You may connect with the economy right now and think about the different impacts that's having. How is the broader business context affecting you? How is it affecting the situation? And how is it affecting your organization? And we can go higher still. Let's look at this from a pestle analysis. So perhaps reflect on the UK, if you're based in the UK, or European political influences. What are they specifically, and how are they impacting on this situation? You may want to think about this in terms of any social influences you're aware of. How about technological influences, or legal or environmental influences? How might they be impacting you, this situation right now? And finally, let's go slightly higher and just think about this from a more of a global view. What else are you aware of in terms of taking a global perspective? What global influences are you facing? So, through creating a space for the team to really reflect on the situation or the challenge that they may be experiencing, you start to see a true picture of the complexity that's involved in a challenge or a situation and the different dynamics and forces that are playing out you may be dealing. And when you understand that complexity, it becomes less personal, it becomes less about the other people involved, and it becomes more about the system. So, systemic leadership really calls on you to approach situations with new ways of relating. So, systemic leaders, it's about optimizing relationships. So, really thinking about the connections, the networks within and outside the organization, and how information and knowledge is shared across. It's about relational thinking. You know, because of the complexity, there's a sense around being comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. You know, and the leader sets the tone. So how can we hold a space that really enables our team to to be comfortable with ambiguity, and moving away from this traditional heroic style of leadership to start thinking around, you know, that the whole system. So it's about recognizing your opinion is not the only one, and how do you engage the system in this situation. And the final piece, new ways of relating, and I spoke about this in terms of my webinar recently on emotional intelligence. It's about understanding the emotional dynamics. So some of the relational dynamics that we've spoken about on this webinar, but also understanding that this aspect of mood contagion. So as a leader, I can really impact in terms of the emotions that the team may be experiencing. So taking more ownership for how I'm feeling, um, and how I'm enabling performance as a result of the emotions that the team are experiencing from me. But just understanding that emotions do have a ripple effect, and we see this through mood contagion in organizations. So to close the session down, I'd just like to reconnect you with the outcome you set for yourself at the start of this session. This has really been a bit of a dip our toe in the water of systemic leadership. And I hope there's some useful reflections and challenges for you to take away, share with your team in terms of the work you're doing and the projects they're involved in. So, what's one insight that you're taking away from this conversation? And how about one immediate action? What do you think you're going to commit to do as a result of listening to this webinar? And just to close, just remind you about the Virtual Leadership Summit resources available on our website. You can see the address on the screen. Please visit our resources section. There's some really interesting webinars in there, and we hope these will be a valuable resource in terms of your development. So thanks for listening to this session. I hope it's been useful, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.